This is the Real Brand Podcast. Welcome home. Okay, we're spending some time today here with Mr. Glenn Simpson, local beekeeper out of Brownsville with bee colonies throughout the valley. It's really good to be with you, Mr. Simpson. We've been excited to talk about the bees and beekeeping. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Well, thank you for coming over so I can share.
Yeah. And one of the things that caught my attention was, really was the BayBees, right? So that's your honey business?
Yeah, the name of my business is BayBees, and it's started out as a kind of a joke. My wife owns a preschool, and she takes care of babies. And before I ever thought of it being a business, we just started calling our honey from BayBees or babies. But it became a much bigger business than I ever thought it would.
So I actually, personally, I thought it was because this is Brownsville by the bay, like BayBees. But that's a much better story. So it actually came from, like, you had the name way before you had the business.
Exactly.
So the name came first. That's funny. And yeah, so that's how I found it because personally I like local honey, and I mean I was just looking for different things to that could, catch our attention here in like local places in the valley. And I saw BayBees and I was like, okay, so this guy's out of Brownsville. But then I started looking more into what you do, and it's a lot more than just the honey's the end product, huh? It's like a byproduct of your work.
Yeah, the honey is actually one of the main sources of income for the business, but there's a lot of different aspects to beekeeping. I teach people about honeybees. The general public always wants to learn, so I do classes and help people learn about different aspects of the honeybees. I also teach beekeeping classes and try to help people that want to become a beekeeper but don't really know how. I try to help them get started. And I also sell bees so that if somebody wants to actually take the big step and become a beekeeper, I also can provide them bees that are from areas outside the valley so they don't have to deal with the Africanized bees. I was doing bee removals also as part of the business, but I had some problems with my shoulder, so I'm not doing removals right now.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm sure we're going to think of a lot of good questions about bees and beekeeping, and that's awesome. It's very interesting. But before we get into that, let's just talk about you for a second. Tell us about yourself. I mean, eventually we're going to get to how, BayBees and this whole work came to be. But give us a little bit of background about yourself, Glenn.
Well, I'm originally from Florida, and I've had a various career. Did land development. I was a partner in an engineering firm. And then I moved to Texas because I started an exotic game ranch up in the hill country. And I saw a need for wireless internet into the rural areas of Texas. So a friend of mine from Germany got together, and we designed some radios that we could put internet out on the ranches where you couldn't even get cell phone service. But my interest in beekeeping started when I was in 4-H club back in 1967. I thought it was a really cool thing to do and just fascinating little creatures. But I went off to college and business world and everything, and I never got into it. When I sold my wireless internet company, I wanted to have 2 beehives in the backyard just as a hobby, and that's where I got started.
So this came from a hobby?
It came from a hobby, which my first year I failed miserably, but I don't take failure very well. So I started learning the mistakes, and what was happening back in 1967 is totally different than the environment we have to deal with today. We didn't have pests like small hive beetles or varroa mites or these things and diseases that are a problem that I'd never heard of back then. So I had to take a deep dive into educating myself all about it.
So what did that look like? I mean, you said the first go around wasn't as successful as we would have liked. So what did you do to to succeed after that?
Well, I had to analyze what I did wrong, and the list was very long. I bought bees from areas outside the valley because I know all we have are feral bees are all Africanized bees. So I had to get genetics from somewhere else and try to raise them here in the valley. I ordered some bees that came in with a lot of pests already in the colony, and they were weak, and I didn't really even know what the pests were. I didn't recognize them, and that colony didn't survive. So I bought more bees, and learning how to handle the hive and how to take the frames in and out without hurting the queen was something I had to learn, because I killed one of my own queens and didn't realize it by taking the frames in and out of the colony improperly. And then there's just so many different things with the weather being very different here. I didn't realize that I had to feed the bees during certain times of the year. So I just started making mistakes right and left when I first started.
So one of the things you mentioned was that you talked about the bees here in the valley. This might be going off track already a little bit, but what kind of bees do we have then? Because like I mentioned earlier, I was talking about the bees that we see in trash cans at the park. So I mean, what type are those?
Well, if it's from the feral bees, the bees we have that live in houses and trees and out in the wild here, those are all Africanized bees. The Africanized bees first entered the United States in 1990 in Weslaco, Texas. So we get to be first at another great thing, the first place that Africanized honeybees arrived. Since then, they have spread their genetics throughout the valley. I have a lot of people say, well, these can't be Africanized bees. They're gentle. They don't bother me. And that's true. They don't until you give them a reason to not be gentle. A bee's going to sting you for one of three reasons: to protect themselves, their home, or their family. And if you don't do anything that they view as a threat, they don't care about you. When they're at the garbage can trying to get drink out of the Coke bottle that's in there, they're not worried about you. They're worried about getting food and taking it back to their colony. When you start to swat at a bee, you just threaten that bee, and that bee's going to become very defensive. European honeybees, like I raise, they don't view that as a big threat. They might not like it, but they'll fly off usually. The Africanized honeybees are going to be very defensive. They're going to try to come back and attack you. And not only do they do that, they also bring their friends. Where the European bees, they don't attack in mass like the Africanized bees do. The biggest problem that triggers the bees tends to be people that have had them in their houses or in a shed in the back and for years, and they've never bothered them, and then they'll be mowing the yard or running a weed eater, and it'll hit a rock and hit the side of the building, and the Africanized bees just boil out by the thousands to defend their home, and they're going to attack whatever they think whether it's a human, a dog, cat, a goat in somebody's yard, they will attack and to protect their home. And so that's the big difference in the bees that we have that are wild here in the valley.
And that's interesting, because I think you brought up another point. So you mentioned that the European bees that you have, they're not as defensive, they're not as aggressive. Does that mean, because I'm sure a lot of us, when we think of beekeeping, we think of those people with the suits and they got bees all over them, and it seems like kind of an intimidating thing. It's a little bit scary. Does that mean that it's really not much of a threat when you're dealing with those bees? They're not much to worry about?
Well, you have to know the bees, and you have to know what is going to trigger them. When you're dealing with a lot of bees and you have to do it in a hurry, you're going to accidentally do things that are going to make even the most docile bee upset. So you have to wear the protective gear. It's like anything else. You want to wear it and hope you never need it. And some bees, if you know the hive and you have good, gentle bees, you can minimize the amount of protective gear that you wear. The European bees have been selected for thousands of years to be highly productive, in their growth patterns. In other words, how many bees they produce so that they can do a lot of work, a lot of pollinating. They've been selected for not swarming, where they don't want the bees to swarm. If a bee swarms, the hive swarms, then you just lost half the bees that were in that colony, so they can't make as much honey and they can't do as much work as they need to. So that's one of the undesirable traits. So they've chose the bees that won't swarm very often. They also choose bees that aren't going to be very reactive when you open the hive and you're actually stealing their food. You don't want the bees to be very defensive. The Africanized bees have been selected by nature to defend themselves and their home. And to them, animals are always trying to get their food. And they've been selected for survival. They've been selected to defend themselves, their home, and protect their food, protect their baby bees so that they can continue to live. They are very reactive to things like somebody that dresses in black. To them, that represents a large animal or a black animal at night trying to steal their food or rip apart and eat their larvae, their young. So black is a color that is somewhat more risky to wear. That's why you'll see beekeeper suits are almost always white. So it's light, then they won't confuse you for an animal trying to kill them.
Okay. We're going to keep that in mind with the whole black outfits, right?
Right.
Okay. So I imagine hopefully your bees have been treating you pretty well.
Well, we've been doing pretty well with it. This year's been kind of tough this summer because it has been so dry and we haven't had a lot of summer plants blooming. So and the rain this spring was strange. We would get a little bit of nectar, then it would stop. Then we get a nice flow and it would stop. So the net honey flow has not been very good this year. So we can't just have a big volume of honey. We had basically no citrus honey this year. The orange blossoms were not as abundant during their normal blooming time. So what happened was the bees would start filling the cells, but they didn't get enough to actually draw the cells out, fill them completely, and cap it off. And you can't harvest the honey if it's not capped, if it hasn't been dried down to where they cap it. So we had to take the bees off of that and put them on something else for them to fill out the cells for the honey.
Okay, but you've got some that have been surviving though, right? They've been thriving.
Oh yeah, they've been surviving. We've had to do some feeding, some supplements in areas where the bees were not getting hardly any plants to bloom. In the urban areas, you'll have irrigated yards and you'll have plants that bloom at different times than our native plants. So the urban bees actually will do better in a drought than the bees that are out in the fields.
That actually leads me to a question that I didn't know I had until I saw your little setup back there, your nursery. So beekeepers, are they also like gardeners? Does that come with the territory? Because you were talking about feeding them, and I realized you had some pollinating plants out there. Is that just something that you have to do as well, or do you kind of do people let the bees go off and forage, or how does that work?
Well, I do it as a part of an education tool to show, because a lot of people, whenever I teach my classes, they want to know what they can do, what plants they can plant to help bring in pollinators for their garden and also help feed the bees. So that's one of the reasons why I've got the plants in my backyard. Most beekeepers put the bees out, and what I do, I look for honey from native plants, not the exotic plants or neighborhoods like you would have in an intentionally planted plot. But the reason I have my yard like that is for educational purposes. But when I talk about feeding the bees, we put a feeder inside the hive and fill it with sugar water. And the bees will go to that sugar water and use that instead of nectar. That does another thing too. Not only does it keep them with the energy part of their food, that allows them to spend more time actually focusing on getting pollen, which is the protein part. So even though the pollen is maybe short, you'll have more bees out trying to focus on gathering pollen. Right now, I'm feeding pollen in my backyard for the bees, then that something is really for the nutrition of the bees to help them get that protein so they'll increase their population for the fall. After this last storm, and if we continue to get rains like we normally do through Labor Day and maybe after that, we might have a really good fall honey flow. And the fall honey will taste and be very different than the spring honey, but at least it's native honey.
From the same bees, right?
Same bee, same location. I can harvest honey from the same hive 2 years apart on the same day, and the honey will taste different. And the difference will be the result of the environment, whether we got an early rain or a late rain, and which plants were blooming in abundance early and didn't bloom late. And the next year, maybe it was dry early and we got rains late. So that's a different group of plants that were blooming in a different time window.
Can you predict the flavor that it's going to have, the profile, or how does that work?
Sort of, but not really. You can have an idea, but you can't really predict it. You know that it might be primarily mesquite. People that say, oh, this is pure mesquite honey. No, it's not. It's predominantly mesquite because you're in an area where you had a lot of mesquite trees that were blooming. But you've got a lot of other things. There'll be Rothama, and there's going to be Anaqua. That if you get a rain, the Anaquas tend to explode with blooms after a rain sometimes. So you're going to have some of that. If you're in an area where you've got different vegetation, it's mostly going to be whatever that vegetation is. But the area has so much mesquite in it, it's all going to have some mesquite flower in it. It's what the other flowers that are around it is really what changes the character of the honey from one place to another.
So I imagine that's what changes the color of the honey as well, because I've seen some dark jars.
Yeah. The fall honey tends to be darker. The plants that are blooming in the fall tend to produce a darker nectar. But everybody knows that flowers have a different fragrance from one to another. A lot of them don't realize that the nectar they produce also has a different flavor. It's not just the aroma, but it's the flavor that's different. So the same's true with color. Some will produce a darker color honey than others. Another thing that will affect the color of the honey, too, is age. And if it was stored in an area that it was hot as opposed to being cool, if it was left in a colony a long time and they produce propolis, which is dark color, and it also is flavored. That propolis is from tree sap. Sometimes the honey will take on some colors and flavors from the propolis when you extract it. So there's so many different aspects of what happens that affect the flavor of the honey.
Okay, and so when we walked in, you were actually bottling some, and you have a lot of bottles out there. It made me wonder how many bees do you have? What's the size of your colonies?
It varies. As we were talking about, I lose a lot of colonies during the year, and I have to, in the spring, I have to split the existing ones that survive the winter and make more. But anywhere from 40 to 60 colonies, all depends on the year and, whether I've been able to take care of them properly. And so in a good honey flow, a colony of bees can put up 30 pounds of honey in a week. Each one of those boxes what we call honey supers, a box that's dedicated to producing honey. The 8 frames, they'll weigh the mediums with only 8 frames will weigh 60 pounds. Maybe up to 80 pounds if it's completely solid filled, then it could weigh 80 pounds. A 10 frame deep, you could weigh for anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds in just one box. So that's a lot of honey. We harvest the honey and we put it in 5-gallon buckets, and a 5-gallon bucket is going to weigh between 58 to 60 pounds. So if you've got a 100-pound super, you've got almost 2 buckets of honey, 2 5-gallons, almost 10 gallons of honey from just one box.
And how long does that take to fill up that box?
In a good honey flow, it could take 3 weeks.
Wow, so this is an ongoing process.
Yeah. And if it's a long honey flow, you stack the boxes. You have multiple boxes on each hive.
And are we talking year round?
No, they only produce it. You heard me use the term honey flow. That's the result of getting the proper rains and sun and clouds at the right time that really make the native plants bloom. And if you've got a really good, strong bloom of nectar-producing plants, that's your flow. And that's why you want really good, strong hives with a heavy population so they can go out and they can collect the nectar and bring it in and dry it down and cap it so that you can harvest the honey.
So beekeepers are looking to start their colonies in an area where there's a lot of local foliage?
Yeah, I look for places that are away from farm fields so that I don't have to worry about pesticides. Some people actually, there's more money in doing pollination of farm fields than there is producing honey. If you look at all the different aspects of business of beekeeping, honey production is the least profitable. In fact, most big beekeepers have to do pollination in order to be able to afford to be in the honey business. The honey business is a different window during the year than the pollination. So it works kind of where it complements each other. You make your profit, your money off of the pollination contracts early. And then the rest of the year when you have honey flows, that also is an additional profit center that may not produce as much profit, but at least you've got your costs taken care of because of what you've done with the pollination contracts.
So it's a seasonal type thing.
Yeah, very seasonal. You have to, if you're going to get into it seriously on a big scale, you have to be able to schedule and manage and understand the dynamics of what all takes place in farming as well as natural communities.
So how is BayBees doing then? How is the community taking the business?
Well, I work really hard at it. It never stops, but I try to produce the best quality product I have. If you buy a bottle of my honey, it's going to come from fresh comb that hasn't been used and reused or ever used for producing brood. So that it's got the cleanest flavor possible. And I try to be consistent in what I produce. So that's got quite a following. I've been lucky. I had a friend telling me I've got a cult following for my honey. But it's because I try hard at it. And yeah, I leave a lot of honey in the box for the bees that isn't what I really want to sell. I could sell more volume and make more money, but it would require a lot more work, and it would possibly reduce the quality of what I produce too.
So talk to us a little bit about that quality, because I'm seeing here one of your bottles. It's raw, unfiltered. Like what goes into the quality of honey, or why is this product so good for you? Why raw honey? Why unfiltered?
Well, if you pasteurize honey, that means getting it over 120 degrees for 20, 30 minutes. You kill all there's living organisms in that honey. There's enzymes also. There's probiotics. There's a lot of chemistry there that our body needs. It's very helpful for us. Honey is one of the best topical antibiotics known to man, and it has been that way for thousands of years. If you pasteurize that honey, you kill all that. You just developed flavored sweetener. So you've just lost all the benefit of actual raw honey. That's what God put it there for, so that we would have a medicine, a natural medicine for our bodies. So having local honey is important if you have allergies. The pollen that's in there, from what I've been told, in the studies, I can't cite the studies, but there have been studies shown that the pollen that's in the honey from your local plant community, it doesn't mean it has to come from your neighborhood, but in the community that the plants are producing pollen that the wind blows throughout the area, like the Rio Grande Valley, will help build some resistance to those allergies. Um, what I have had personal experience with is the antibiotic benefits. I know of someone who's had an ulcer, and the doctor were having problems, and the person started taking about a tablespoon of honey a day, and within a couple of months, it straightened out the problems with the ulcer. I'm not telling you to take it for ulcers and forget what your doctor says. No, not at all. I'm just saying this is an anecdotal situation. I do know of someone who had surgery, and the surgery site got infected, and it wasn't reacting to the antibiotics they were taking. It may have been holding its own, but it wasn't healing. They started using honey, and within just a couple of days, the margins around the incision started turning pink instead of red, and they started healing, and it healed very rapidly once they started putting honey on it. So historically, people have known that. People before our medicine, our scientific community developed, knew that there were benefits from honey and how to use it. So that's why it's important to get raw, unfiltered honey so that you still have those benefits. You haven't had all of the good stuff filtered out or cooked out of it.
So the teddy bear bottle from Walmart that came from Connecticut, it won't do much for us here then, huh?
If you're looking at something for allergies, I don't care if they put a raw, unfiltered label on it, it isn't going to help you.
Okay, so it has to be raw and local raw unfiltered honey.
Yeah.
Okay. Is beekeeping, is there a foothold for that here in the Valley? I mean, is that something that there's like a group of you guys doing it?
Well, back in the 70s and 80s, there was a big beekeeping community in the Valley. A lot of people would bring their bees down here. After the Africanized bees arrived and some of the other diseases arrived, there was almost no beekeeping. It just went away. There were some guys that just tried, and we didn't know how to deal with the Africanized bees or the varroa mites or the small hive beetles that will pretty much tear up a colony. Just like I was my first 3 years. I mean, I didn't know. I had no clue how to deal with these things that we didn't have back in the 60s. So when I started, I met one beekeeper, but he was really busy. And I didn't have anybody or a beekeeping organization to go to try and learn how to become a beekeeper. So after I finally got marginally successful, and I met some guys up in the Corpus area that had a beekeepers club, a beekeepers organization. We got one started down here. It was kind of an offshoot of their organization. We started having meetings, and we were bringing in people to share things they were doing, and a lot of people wanted to get into beekeeping. But then COVID came along, and we couldn't have meetings anymore. So that just kind of fell to the wayside. There are a lot of people that are interested. We have quite a few beekeepers now in the Valley. A lot of them, and I think, to be honest with you, I think the best ones are the ones that are sort of like I am. They've got a reasonable number of hives. They care about the product they produce, and they want to really, one way to tell if it's a beekeeper or just somebody reselling honey is you ask where the honey comes from, and they say, well, I'm a beekeeper. And, well, can you show me your hives? A real beekeeper is going to be proud of it. Yeah, I'll be glad to show you my hives. I'll show you, where everything happens. But there's a lot of shady people there. I don't know if you've ever watched the show on Netflix called Rotten, but one of the episodes they did was on the honey industry and some of them scrupulous things that are done. But we don't have that here with the small beekeepers. And that's one of the things that I really like, I really enjoy to see happening is the people that are serious about it and they're proud of the product they produce.
Okay, so you mentioned there's a lot of interest around here. With that in mind, is there anything you want us to know about bees? I mean, what I think of is that a lot of us have a lot of preconceived notions, whether it's a fear of bees or sometimes we try to attract them, like to pollinate, the area. Is there now that you got us all listening, anything you want us to know, any tips or facts about bees that we should be aware of?
Well, one of them is the myth that the honeybees are endangered and they're going extinct. That's a myth. There's truth in the fact that a few years ago, we were losing 50% of our hives every year, which when I was starting, that was part of the problem I had. I had no clue what was going on. But the fact that we can split our hives, the ones that do make it through the winter, in the spring, we take a good, healthy hive and we will split that hive into 2 or 3 hives, and we'll buy queens from outside the area so that we've got good known genetics so that we recover from the hives we lose, or we'll buy hives from somewhere else. So there is really no net loss of honeybees in the United States or actually in the world. Another thing that when I do a lot of presentations, I'll ask people, how many people like chocolate? Of course, everybody raises their hands. How many people drink coffee? Everybody raises their hand. If it were not for commercial beekeepers, you would not have chocolate or coffee in the grocery stores because they have to be pollinated on a massive scale because they're large farms, and that requires honeybees. Native pollinators will not pollinate it on the scale that's needed. So there's a couple of things. The importance of it, not just watermelons, but there's a lot of things that we eat every day that need honeybees, and that honeybees aren't going extinct, but we do need to care for them. We do need to realize their importance and respect that.
And how can we care for them, or how can we make sure that we don't get in the way?
Well, one of the things is just trying to learn about the facts about their behavior. Don't be afraid of them. If you have bees in your soffit or in the wall of a barn or building, call a beekeeper and have them removed, or don't leave them there because sooner or later they will become dangerous. That's one thing that people need to realize. The other thing is that people are always asking me about what they can plant or what should they do to help the bees. They want to plant flowers and zinnias and sunflowers and things like that, and that's good. It looks nice. It provides pollen for the bees. But what's really important, if you want to help the bees, plant some of the native plants that we have that bloom late in the fall, like the goldenrod. We've got a variety of native goldenrod that grows down here. That's one of the last native plants that blooms before winter. So that's the time that the bees don't have anything else producing food, but the goldenrod is. So that's one of the things that you can plant. And there's a few other plants like that. But if you want to help feed honeybees and draw them into your gardens, that's one of the things I'd recommend.
Nice, nice. So to switch gears a little bit, we talked off mic how you were born in Florida, spent some time in Kingsville. It sounds like you spent some time also in the hill country with that ranch you had up there. Then you found yourself in Brownsville in the Rio Grande Valley. So we got to ask you now, we ask everybody, what do you love about the valley?
Well, I love the culture. It reminds me of what Florida was like back in the 60s and the 70s, where people know people and people tend to try to help people. The culture is very nice. It's not like a lot of the cities now and a lot of areas where it's a lot of hustle and bustle, but everybody's trying to push everybody else out of the way. It's not really like that down here. The other thing is that South Padre Island reminds me of what the east coast of Florida was like back in the 70s, kind of a homey atmosphere. It does have its seasons and things kind of come and go. And the natives usually go out to the island when everybody else is gone. That's our special time when we don't have a lot of people from other places here. But I keep telling my wife that the Rio Grande Valley is the biggest small town I've ever lived in, because you can't go anywhere where somebody doesn't know your family or your neighbor or somebody. So I like that. I like that aspect of it, the family aspect of the valley.
Yeah, we definitely get that a lot. And I guess, especially not being from here, you get to see the contrast.
Yeah.
So that's good for us locals to hear, right? We gotta we gotta appreciate the area that we're in because I guess it's not like that everywhere.
No, it's not like that. People don't really care about their neighbors in many places I've lived. You might nod at somebody, but you don't have a conversation with them. In our neighborhood here, we get to know everybody. Somebody needs help, we help them.
All right. Well, looks like the Valley found a new friend in Glenn Simpson, owner of BayBees, owner operator, huh?
Yeah.
So that's awesome. And we can find you like at local markets, right? I mean, you're out there on the weekends?
Well, I'm at the Brownsville Farmers Market every Saturday morning, which is in Linear Park right across from the Gladys Porter Zoo on Saturday mornings from 9 until noon. And then once a month over at Tres Lagos, the north side of McAllen at the intersection of Ware and Monte Cristo, there's a really nice subdivision, and they have a market once a month up there, and we sell our honey in that area too.
So we can find you out there.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll be looking for you. I really appreciate the little bottle of honey here, BayBees raw honey unfiltered. I'm looking forward to that. Personally, I'm a big fan of local honey. I know my wife is too, and I'll tell you right now, I actually have an aunt. Anecdotal again, but
Yeah.
she actually told us about the whole allergies thing. If you have allergies, take a spoonful in the morning.
Yeah.
So I've heard that too. So that's interesting that you mentioned that also. So I guess there's a lot of us out there that are going to probably try that because one thing about the valley is that the seasonal allergies are real
Yeah.
down here.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that's good. That's good that we have one more thing to try, right? To take care of that issue. But thank you so much for your time. We learned a lot. I think it's gonna make us appreciate the bees around us a little bit more, and we gotta stop swatting then, right?
That's right.
That's one thing we learned. And if we swat, we're probably making it worse for everybody around who stays,
That's
who
exactly
doesn't run
right.
away.
Yeah.
Okay, well-
Just walk away.
I'm gonna remember that one. But thank you so much, Mr. Glenn. We appreciate it. Great talk.
Thank you very much. I'm honored.
You guys have a good evening, a good day. Have fun, everybody. See you next week. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Don't forget to follow the show on social media for updates on episodes, interactive content, and more opportunities to grow together. We'll see you again next week on your podcast, The Real Grand Podcast. Stay safe. Take care.